Fabulous. So welcome to all those who are joining. Welcome to our first EnergyREV webinar on digital energy platforms. While we wait a few minutes for folk to join, I thought I'd just give you a little bit of an overview of what we're doing and to tell you that you can now go to our website and download our white paper on digital energy platforms that this webinar is going to be based on. So this report is hot off the press. It was published only about an hour ago. And one of my colleagues momentarily will be popping a link into the chat box so you can access our report. And if that doesn't work, you can visit or navigate to www.energyrev.org.uk, go to the outputs page, and it should be right at the top, and it's titled Policy and Regulatory Landscape Review Series, Working Paper 2. So thank you to Jeff for popping a link in the chat. All right, so I can see that quite a few people have joined now. So I think we'll get started with the intro. So welcome to our EnergyREV webinar on digital energy platforms. My name is Rebecca Ford. I'm the Research Director for EnergyREV, and I'm going to be chairing the session today. And we've got a fabulous lineup of speakers for you who are going to share some of their insights into the policy and regulatory landscape around digital energy platforms and focus on their role in unlocking value in smart local energy systems. And as I said earlier, the insights that we're sharing are underpinned by a huge amount of research that the team's been doing. And they've distilled that into a very succinct and interesting report, which was published this morning about an hour ago. And you can find it on the website. And in case you've only just joined, Jeff or Maddie could ask you to pop it in the chat again, the link in the chat again. So the work was done, the work in this report was done by our EnergyREV policy and regulatory team, led by Jeff Hardy, who's one of the speakers you'll be hearing from today. And this team works alongside another 50 or so researchers from across 22 UK universities. And this is the EnergyREV Consortium. And so our consortium brings together academics from a huge range of disciplines and areas of expertise. And we're working to try and understand more broadly how smart local energy systems can play a role in a prosperous net zero energy future. And the EnergyREV team is part of the Prospering from the Energy Revolution programme, or PFER as you may hear it referred to. And the PFER programme brings together, in fact, even more people. So there's 4 large-scale demonstration projects of smart local energy systems, 10 detailed design projects, and then a backbone of research and innovation that's provided by both EnergyREV and the Energy Systems Catapult. So a huge, huge effort once you bring everybody together. And ultimately, across the PFER programme, we're trying to understand the role of these smart local energy systems. So integrated, cross-vector energy systems, bringing together power, heat, mobility, implemented at local scales, often involving local actors, and with the potential to deliver benefits way beyond just energy. And underpinning much of this is the smart component, which really includes a lot of digitalization, data and digitalization, and the emergence of new services and offerings that are provided by digital energy platforms. And that's the focus of our webinar today. So our 4 great speakers that you've got, first up, we've got Madeline Morris and Jeff Hardy, both of whom are based at the Grantham Institute at Imperial College London, and they're the lead authors of the report. And they're going to talk for about 15 minutes or so. And then we'll hear a brief response from Dinka Bardwaj, who's the head of data policy in the electricity systems team in BEIS. And then from Kelsey Devine, who's an innovation project manager at Picklo, leading their work on Project Leo, which is one of the PFER demonstration projects, and also the BEIS Flex Exchange. And then we'll finish up with about 20 minutes of Q&A. So please use our Q&A function if you want to ask any questions during the talks. We're going to hold all questions to the end, although our participants can respond to any clarifying questions as others are speaking. So we'll try and do that as we go through, but we'll hold all discussions until the end. But we've set it up so that you can comment on each other's questions and upvote questions that you like. So please do that. So push those questions up to the top that you really like. A final reminder that we're going to be recording the session today, and we'll make it available on our website alongside our report just as soon as we can. So without further ado, I will pass you over to Maddie. Maddie, do you want to take us away?
Thank you, Becky. So hi everybody, I am Maddie, and as Becky says, I'm one of the lead authors on the report that we are just publishing, and I work with Jeff Hardy in the team that he leads in EnergyREV. And the overarching research question that we are trying to answer in our team is whether we have the appropriate policy, institutional and regulatory framework to realise the technical, economic and societal potential of smart local energy systems. The reason that we're asking this question is because the current policy and regulatory landscape has its roots in a centralised and analogue electricity and gas system. Increasingly, the sector is moving towards a decentralised and digitalised system, and the traditional boundaries that exist within that sector are being broken down. So now we need to ask whether the rules and the policies of today are fit for purpose for energy systems of the future, where smart local energy systems might play a role. It's a difficult question to answer because the policy and regulatory landscape is complex and very opaque, and we consistently hear from energy practitioners that wading through all the literature and getting any sort of meaningful insight is very tricky. This is true across the whole industry, but I think it's particularly problematic potentially for smart local energy systems because the rules weren't written with them in mind, and they often involve non-traditional assets and resources and actors. And so it can be much more difficult to get some meaning out of the policies. So what we're doing in our team is trying to make that policy and regulatory landscape more accessible by conducting this landscape review series. And I'll not say much about the method that we're doing to do this, but all I'll say is that we're using a very systematic and rigorous approach to reviewing the literature that we gather, and that I also want to say that we're involving stakeholders in all this, at every step of this process. So we asked our stakeholders to send us literature that they knew was impacting, so that contained policies or regulations that was impacting on their activities, so that we didn't miss anything. And we also have external stakeholders, including Dinker and colleagues at BEIS and UK, the Welsh Government and some industrial partners who reviewed our report and made sure that we were on the right track. So the review brings up themes that come up, and that shapes how our reports are written. And so in the review series so far, we have published a report on electric vehicles and electricity storage. That was last year. There's this one on digital energy platforms that has just been published, and there's a link to that in the chat box, and you can also find it at our website. And we're also well underway in our third review on heating and cooling, demand, supply and storage, and that should be out in the next few months. So back to digital energy platforms. What exactly is a digital energy platform? Well, definitions, or the lack of definitions, was one of the most immediately obvious potential issues that came up in our review. This is a currently mostly unregulated space, and as such, there's no universally accepted or adopted definition for what a digital energy platform is. So for the purposes of this particular piece of work, we're adopting a definition that has been proposed previously, and that is that they are digital spaces where users can communicate and interact with each other and get access to products, services, or more broadly, resources that are provided by peers or organisations. The concept of digital platforms is not new. It's not unique to energy, and many areas of the economy have been transformed by platforms, and their emergence is driven by the trend of digitalisation that we see across the whole economy. And the core concept of digital platforms is that rather than business models that are based on owning physical assets or infrastructure, they instead provide connections between those who can offer products and services and those who need them. And so some examples of platforms that you'll undoubtedly be familiar with are things like Airbnb, which is a platform model in the kind of travel and accommodation sector, and then things like Uber and Lyft in the ride sharing. There are already some platforms that exist in energy that have been around for quite a while, but energy hasn't seen the same level of disruption or impact from digital platforms that other areas of the economy have. There are signs that is rapidly changing, and there are many platform models that are now emerging. So the lack of definitions isn't so much of an issue at the moment, and in fact platforms themselves may prefer to remain undefined because it gives them more freedom to innovate and push some boundaries. But in energy, this is a potentially risky situation. Energy is an essential service, and so we do need protections in place for the system and its users. So there's this delicate balance that Jeff will talk a little bit more about between regulating and still allowing for innovation. So some examples of platforms that are emerging. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but it's things like peer-to-peer trading models, local energy markets, and we have home energy management systems and active network management. They're two that have been around for quite a while. Virtual power plants, and of course, flexibility platforms. We have case studies of each of these in our report that look at exactly what the role of the platform is, who's involved, and how they provide value to the system. And Piccolo is an example of the flexibility platform, and Kelsey will be able to give her view from that side later. The themes that came up in this review in terms of policy and regulation that will affect digital energy platforms and their emergence were data, markets, and roles and responsibilities. So I will take you through the first two, and then I'll hand over to Jeff, who will look at roles and responsibilities. So data is hugely important for digital energy platforms. It underpins many of the activities and the products and services that they offer, and it's also a driver for digitalization, which in turn is what is one of the key things that drives the emergence of platform models. The Energy Data Task Force was set up by the government in 2018 with the task to investigate how data can transform the energy sector. And then last summer, they released their strategy for a modern, digitalized energy system. And that was based around two key principles. One, that we need to fill in data gaps, and two, that we need to maximize the value of data. And it recommended 5 steps to get there, including that the sector needs to adopt the principle of digitalization, and also the principle that energy system data should be presumed open, unless to do so would be unsafe. It also recommended that there's a data catalogue that's established, which is underpinned by standardized data, and that should also establish both an asset registration strategy and a unified digital system map. And that's all going towards this, filling in the gaps and maximizing the value. Many of these are already being acted upon. The government and Ofgem have accepted the recommendations and are moving quite quickly towards implementing them. And these recommendations are underpinned by key findings from the task force that are very similar to those that we found, that digitalisation in the energy sector is actually lagging behind many other sectors. So although digitalisation can transform sectors like retail and finance, energy is going a little bit slower. And that's partly because the value of energy data isn't well understood or embraced. Lots of the data that would help us move forwards with digitalisation is missing. So that's missing data such as consumer consumption data, and the smart metering programme is one of the biggest efforts to fill in those gaps. There's also gaps that become really problematic at the kind of local distribution network level. So distribution network operators, DNOs, in many cases cannot see what assets are actually connected to their networks or where those assets are. And as decentralisation increases, that's going to be much more complicated and complex. A lot of data does exist, but there's no common standards that underpins how that data is collected or stored, and so it's not interoperable between different actors in the sector. This is already an issue for incumbents, and it's also been cited as a major barrier to entry for innovators. Getting access to data that already does exist is also a huge issue. The data is kept private usually by companies, and that's ostensibly for consumer and system protection reasons, which in many cases is absolutely valid, but there's also likely a perceived commercial advantage to keeping the data behind closed doors. The Data Task Force is very clear that we need to completely shift to a system where we have a presumed open data. So unless that data has to be kept private, it should be open and shared. And that's because to maximize the value of data, we really need everybody to know what data is there, and the innovation might come from outside of the energy sector itself. Of course, cybersecurity cannot be compromised with this, so we need to understand how to keep the data secure, but also enable data sharing. And again, the task force is clear that it doesn't feel that these two goals are mutually exclusive and could in fact help each other. From a smart local energy systems point of view and a digital platforms point of view, then there's huge implications here because of the fact that data is so crucial to digital platforms. And so if the energy industry doesn't act upon the recommendations made by the task force, or if it acts too slowly or in a way that is deemed to be dangerous to any members of the system, the government and the regulator will step in. There have been huge mistakes made by digital platforms in other sectors. And so the fact that digitalization hasn't progressed as quickly in energy can actually be seen as a real opportunity here to learn from other sectors. The PFER projects and other smart local energy system projects are in an ideal position to be able to show exactly how these new ways of working, these new paradigms can be put into practice, and they can provide the evidence that will inform policy and regulatory developments in the future. On markets, many digital energy platforms could unlock the flexibility potential of the vast and growing number of distributed assets that are connected to the system. And that could help make better use of local resources, and in some cases even provide incentives for people to become more engaged in energy. But much like data, the value of flexibility is not fully embraced in the energy sector. And there are issues with the existing markets. So current flexibility markets are at the national level. They are mostly designed for large actors who are connected to the transmission system. And so accessing it from non-traditional methods is much more difficult. And being able to participate in combinations of markets in order to stack revenue, so to accumulate value from all the different services that they could potentially provide to the system, is sometimes an avenue that's blocked. And without that, then the business cases for some digital energy platforms may not be viable. There are some changes to the current markets that are being made, but progress is generally quite slow. And actually reforming them is probably not going to be enough to realise the benefits that smart local energy systems and digital energy platforms could bring. And so new markets are definitely going to be necessary. They're already emerging, and the PFER projects are an excellent example of where this is happening. These markets will need to become much more cross-sector and cross-vector, and that kind of integration is not well understood in energy yet. So again, the PFER projects and other SLES projects have an opportunity here to demonstrate the value of new non-traditional markets, and they're very well placed to contribute to market design, and crucially to do so in a way that is user-friendly and improves the experience of all actors. And again, they can look to and learn valuable lessons from other sectors who have gone before them here. And with that, I will hand over to Jeff, who will take you through the policy and regulation.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Maddie. That was superb. I'm going to skip through policy and regulation, and then I'm going to summarize really kind of like the main messages of this report. I'm going to do that quite quickly because I'm dying to hear from Dinka and Kelsey, and I'm seeing that questions are already coming in, which is terrific news because that's telling us that, well, you're awake and that you're potentially interested. So that's all good news. So I looked into the policy and regulation impacts and aspects of this. I'm going to cover three different things. So I'm going to cover the fact that digitalization is going to change roles and responsibilities. It's also going to change the roles of energy system actors, and it does require some decisions. So let me start with the fact that it's going to change roles and responsibilities. So you heard from Maddie earlier that there is the Energy Data Task Force recommendations in place. These have been accepted by government and the regulator. But a lot of the onus now is on industry to play ball, to live those recommendations, to implement, to really bring that transparency and accessibility of data within the energy system to really unleash some of this innovation that we're talking about. Now, that may well happen. If it doesn't, then I think that you will find that the government and the regulator will step in and mandate some of that changes to happen. And that might or might not be in the interests of particular business models in the system. So that's a mindful point. Also, digitalization of energy, as in other sectors, tends to spawn a number of really interesting and potentially disruptive business models. Now, typically in energy regulation, entities that are regulated through a license, and there's quite a lot of prescription in that license that kind of like looks after customer protection and kind of like all sorts of things like adherence to industry codes and so forth. Because we don't know what models could emerge when this data is released, there seems to be a really strong case to move away from a prescriptive regulatory regime to something that looks a lot more agile, flexible, anticipatory, principles-based governance or ethical governance. And this is something that Ofgem I know is really interested in, but we're yet to see how this might come into play for digital energy platforms. Already as well, new institutions are being created as a consequence of digitalization in other sectors. So for example, there's a new advisory group called the Center for Data Ethics and Innovation in place. And it might be the case that other entities and institutions are required in order to manage either within energy or across sectors as this digitalization journey continues. So in terms of implications, what we're really seeing here is that digitalization of energy and the emergence of these platforms is really a balancing act for policymakers and regulators, a Goldilocks dilemma, if you like, whereby acting too soon, perhaps prescribing what these models are and therefore fixing them, could stifle innovation. But if you leave too much space and businesses emerge that really do lock in consumers and cause consumer harm, either economic or otherwise, then you might regret not moving sooner. So there's a real challenge there about when is the right time for regulators to act in this space. And here's where the Prospering from the Energy Revolution projects have got a really unique opportunity to do this experimentation, to do the right thing and to do the thing right, and work out and help inform what that just right model of governance looks like. Oh, Maddie, can you move me on a slide? Hammering away on the key, and of course, I don't have that power. The second one is that these digital energy platforms and digitalization of energy is going to change the roles of energy system actors. So for example, as Maddie already talked about, it could really unleash the potential of these distribution network connected distributed energy resources. It could create this route to market. So if they've got services, there may well be a lot of buyers through these platforms that are going to value their services. And it might also provide more markets and other opportunities to stack up that value that Maddie also talked about. So it could be good. Also, for consumers, so including us as citizens and energy, consumers, it could play multiple roles. We could play multiple roles. So we own important data. So as well as smart meter data, there's a lot of other data that we have and should be in charge of that could be really valuable to running a system in the future. The second thing is we might also, well, we do already, and we may in the future own even more valuable assets. So, we have things that could react to energy system needs, like turning on and off devices in our homes. And we might also have increasingly smart systems in our homes, including photovoltaics, batteries, electric vehicles, smart heating systems, all of that kind of thing. So we could also play a role in the system, either as consumers or as producer consumers, prosumers, whatever it might be. But the key thing here is that that's only going to happen. We're only going to give away data, and we're only going to let people use our assets or put our assets into markets if we trust these digital energy platforms, and they will stand or fall on that trust. The final point here is there's going to be a potentially large role change for both the electricity system operator and the current distribution network operator. And in the future, what that might mean is the distribution network operator, the local grid operator, might start taking on system operation role because all of this interesting kit is connecting in their patch, and therefore they might want to take a much stronger role in system management and balancing than they do today. Or it might be the case that the electricity system operator, National Grid in the UK, takes on that role and reaches down into networks. and starts to control things and actually somewhat diminishes the role of the current distribution network operator. The thing is, we don't actually know where that's going to settle out at. There's an awful lot of work going on at the moment, but it's actually unclear where these responsibilities are going to settle. Now, that's important because who is going to be the neutral market facilitator for a lot of the services that these digital energy platforms are going to be able to facilitate really matters in this, because it's the difference between, let's say, a local energy market and a very national system of markets. And you want to know where you're going to be able to realize that value if you're going to be operating one of these platforms or if you're a customer of it. So again, the implications are that these platforms really could unlock the potential of distributed energy resources and unlock the ability of consumers to participate in the energy market, but only if there's trust, routes to markets for their services, and commensurate value that they can realize, whatever that is that they want to realize within that. It might not always be monetary value, for example. The second point is that system operation is almost certain to become more complicated in the future. If you just look back at May this year and the really low demand that we had on the system because of the pandemic, you'll see that that really was some interesting challenges. And that's just a snapshot of what it could be like in the future. And so there will be lots of more parties involved in providing these essential services, but it's really unclear about this balance between local and national kind of players in there. So that's coming, but we don't know what it's going to be. And again, these PFER projects can really show the way forward on unleashing the potential of the demand side as these trusted intermediaries, and they also give new, they could also play new roles within these new, or they could give new insight into the roles of, say, the electricity system operator and the distribution system operator. Next slide, Maddie. Okay, so the final point on policy and regulation is that some decisions are going to be required by government and by Ofgem. So I think what we found was that government really does have a critical role in providing vision, leadership, data access, space for innovation, and maybe sorting out some emerging issues like cross-border issues. So let's say a digital energy platform is based in one country, but has a market in another. That value is going to flow somewhere. So there's going to be all sorts of issues of tax and so forth that you have with other digital energy digital platforms in other sectors. Ofgem has got a really important role in enabling digital energy platforms by creating the space in the regulatory regime and allowing some of this experimentation, such as in these Prospering from the Energy Revolution projects. And they've just updated their guidance on creating a regulatory sandbox in the UK on this, which should provide more space to play, if you like. But Ofgem is also going to need to consider at some point if, when, and how these digital energy platforms should be defined and regulated. And this might be via activity or principles or agile or some form of regulation that allows that more, that allows the models to grow without prescribing and describing what they are too early. So back to that Goldilocks dilemma. And then finally, the sector more broadly, but government and regulation in particular, are going to need to adapt. And this includes digitally upskilling. So this is, there's a whole new skill set that comes into a digitalized system, all sorts of things, everything from data science, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and so forth. So it's a note that government and regulation are going to have to be very good at understanding digitalized energy systems and digitalized systems generally, as well as the industry will want those skills in order to take advantage of all of this wonderful data that's coming. So again, a high level point, it's a bit obvious, but it is important, is that government and Ofgem are going to take decisions and that these could impact on smart local energy systems, positively or negatively. And that we need more feedback loops so that agile approaches to regulation can be implemented and compliant monitored. So the regulator will need to be comfortable it has the data to understand that the market is performing and these business models are doing the right thing in the system. So the final point here is, again, that these projects from the Prospering from the Energy Revolution program will generate evidence to inform decisions that in turn will affect their own business models. And they must allow this evidence to flow so that decision makers can take these good, well-informed, evidence-based decisions. Final slide, Maddie. Wonderful. So this is stating what we've already told you, but the energy sector is moving at a slower pace than other sectors, and that's a good thing. We can learn the lessons that other sectors have learned. The second one is absolutely crucial. Digital energy platforms absolutely need to be trusted if all of these service providers and those with problems are going to meet on these platforms. And if the government and the regulator is going to allow them space to do their thing without either prescribing them or stamping down on them. And then finally, the PFER program and other related activities have got a real opportunity right now to shape policy and regulation, market design that is going to allow these digital energy platforms to thrive. So thank you all very much for your attention, and I'm dying to hear from Dinka and Kelsey, so I'm going to stop right there.
Thanks, Maddie, and thanks, Jeff. That was really interesting, and we've got questions pouring in. So this is just a quick reminder to everybody, please use our Q&A box to ask questions, comment on questions you can see there, and upvote your favourites, and we'll come to them at the end. And I will also take this opportunity to remind you that if you enjoyed that overview, then please do download the report. There's a lot more information in there. And now I will pass over to Dinka for a response.
Great. Thanks, Becky. So not so much a response, but I think the first thing for me to say is to thank Jeff, Maddie, and the authors for doing this. I think there is a lot of value in doing these literature reviews and then synthesizing them into conclusions for everyone to see. So thank you for doing that. And I think that's very valuable. Cool. So I will keep my remarks relatively short because I want to give more time for questions. But I guess a disclaimer, as Becky said, I head the data policy team in electricity systems. So I will not venture into a lot of discussion around the design of platforms because that's not something I want to opine on necessarily. But I definitely want to talk about the data and digitalization implications for digital energy platforms, which I think you will all agree is an important part of the conceptual model. And the model itself, I think, is fairly simple. And if you can see the whiteboard behind me, that's my conceptual model for a digital energy platform. I never knew I'd use it this way, but basically you're trying to bring in data from networks, from demand consumption, which could be suppliers, markets, which could be wholesale, balancing, ancillary services, whatever, and also from the assets themselves. So if you're looking at small scale DSR, you need to know about appliances and the rest of it. So that's all sort of energy information, but equally depending on what your platform is hoping to provide, you might want information from the meteorological department. So you might want weather information. You might want lands and building information. So really the platform has to design itself as a place where it can receive all sorts of information from different parts to be then able to offer either analytics or some sort of service to consumers and for service providers to also offer their products. So if that's the conceptual model, I think that's relatively easy to get your head around. But the challenge is, how do you get the necessary data in the right quality, the right granularity, the right permissions, the right security to then allow the platform to do its thing? So, I mean, I was looking at the questions. There are thoughts around smart meter data, consumption data, and I completely understand the privacy concerns around it. I think the task force was quite smart in sidestepping that issue slightly by focusing on non-private data, so to speak. So we emphasized a lot on the value that system data can provide to markets like these. So is there value in making network data available in some sort of better format? Will that help? Is there value in getting non-private consumption data to the system? Will that help? So we've tried to focus on avoiding the difficult privacy question and seeing if there's value to be determined from non-GDPR regulated data, so to speak. And we feel that there is a lot of value. So just knowing how the networks are performing, constraints, headrooms, that can be really useful. And Kelsey will, I'm sure, talk a lot more about that. But our focus has always been on making data available for different use cases. So we have not necessarily tried to dictate what a platform should be doing. We have just tried to say, okay, if there is a data requirement, how do we make that happen? So that's the context. I can talk more about what we're doing to implement the task force recommendations, but I think that's probably a tangential point. I will try and focus on what the conclusions of this paper mean for some of the work that we're doing. So there are 9 conclusions, I think, in your paper, Jeff. And I focused on 3 of them. So conclusion one is basically a thinly veiled threat to the industry that if you don't act, then government and regulator will, which I think is right, but I don't think it should be seen as a disincentive or something to stop you from doing your thing. It should more be, if you're learning something in your work, you should find a way to inform the regulator and government in how they go about designing regulation. So that's definitely how you should look at it. There's another conclusion about government and regulator providing regulatory clarity and guidance on how they intend to go about regulating the space. And I think a lot of kudos to Ofgem for making some really good announcements on their expectation regarding data and data stewardship going forward. So if you have not, you should look at the open letter that Ofgem have published in response to the network's digitalization strategies. You should also look at recent announcements coming out around Rio 2. I think there is one publication that came out on early this month, and there's another on the electricity distribution price control, which is expected end of this month. So both those documents will make some more clear statements about what Ofgem is thinking about in terms of regulating data and its provision as far as the regulated networks are concerned. So hopefully that will give some clarity. And then there is this big piece around standards, right? So both Maddie and Jeff talked about the need for standards in this space. And the balance always is, if you're too prescriptive, then you end up stifling a lot of innovation. But if you're too loose, then you don't give enough clarity to people to decide how they might want to operate. So I think government understands that balance, and there are various teams and bays which are looking at that. But one particular interesting thing for this group might be the upcoming consultation on standards by the British Standards Institution. I think it's called PAS 1878, but it's basically about how do you standardize energy smart appliances insofar as those appliances can provide small-scale DSR services. So that standardization of smart appliances would be super important for digital energy platforms interested in interacting with those appliances to decide how they might want to design their standards. And hopefully those standards don't develop in a way which end up, making interoperability difficult for existing platforms. So that's another useful thing that the group here should be aware of. So I guess all I wanted to say was that we agree in policy the importance of interoperability. We agree in policy on the importance of setting regulatory and governance expectations. And we agree in policy the need for providing some sort of standards which help the industry to coalesce around a focal point and then grow out of it. So yeah, so in a sense, all I want to say is that this analysis and synthesis is really important. Hopefully it will give people a reason to, or elevate the conversation. And all I want to say from my end is that at BASE and Ofgem, on behalf of Ofgem, I think we recognize these issues, and hopefully the steps that we are taking are all in the right direction. But like I said, very happy to answer any questions that you might have. Some I might know the answer to, but some I'll probably take back and refer other colleagues to. But that's all I wanted to say right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Dinka. That was great. I can see the questions are still pouring in, so keep voting up your favourites, and I'll pass over to Kelsey for her perspective.
Cool. I'll try and keep this quick because it looks like we're running over time here. I'm from PICLO. For those of you that don't know, just a brief overview. PICLO is, I guess, what we'll call a digital platform within the energy system. We are essentially an online marketplace used by the DSOs currently to procure flexibility from distributed energy assets. And we are also the lead of work package 2 within Project Leo, which is looking at how platforms can be used to advance local energy markets. So I think, yeah, again, very relevant to this discussion. And I guess I'll just kind of focus my discussion here around how PICLO has kind of evolved, and I think fits these principles that are highlighted in this paper around kind of transparency and visibility of what's happening within the flexibility market, as well as the need for there to be some sort of standards to help the kind of usability and build up of the market, and use all these different things to lower the barriers to entry, so that we can increase the participation and through our business as usual work that we're doing, as well as Project Leo and the Base Flex Exchange, we really see the use of our platform to be able to expand past just this one service that's on there right now of DSO procured flexibility, and start to bring in some of these peer-to-peer markets or national level markets, and have it as a kind of centralized place where we've streamlined the processes across these different markets a little bit, and make it easy for different players to use, so that you don't need to be a big balancing registered unit to be participating in local peer-to-peer markets. And Leo really does help bring it down to a local level, and through the other partners that we have on the project, like Low Carbon Hub, and some work they're doing around smart and fair neighborhoods, bringing it down to a really low level, and making it easy for participation to grow at a level that's not kind of big energy companies, but individual households or neighborhoods in that participation. So I think the need for an agile approach here is really necessary. Even over the last year and a half, as we've developed and set up from the beginning, we've found the data that we collect, the information that needs to be provided is constantly changing. The requirements are going to be different, and we've had to adapt to that change. And so I think all these platforms do need to be built in a way that adapt, because this flexibility industry is so fast moving. The kind of parameters are going to need to change. Right now, as was mentioned, we're not regulated, but I guess having that in mind and how that could impact us in the long run as well is something to be aware of. But just, I guess, really making sure that the transparency is there on both sides of the market just does build the trust for our users without having that regulation there. And I think the success we've had is due to that transparency and making it easier to understand how these markets are working, and kind of being on that journey with our users as well. And I think just I think last week we released a case study. The last procurement round UKPN did for flexibility went all the way down to low voltage levels, and there was a ton of EVs that won contracts, and in total I think £14 million worth of flexibility contracts were awarded, compared to when we ran similar competitions a year before, and it was just under £500,000. So I guess it does take time to build up these markets, but if the right mechanisms are in place, like these digital platforms, and we can kind of help everyone move along this journey together in an easy way that does reduce barriers, it does seem to be working. And so yeah, I think we'll continue on with this. We hope to use Leo, like I said, to increase the number of markets or services that are available on Piccolo, and just have it as a place where once you have uploaded your data, you will have these different options to participate in different markets and follow along in similar processes and mechanisms with that one set of information. So yeah, I'll leave it there for now.
Thanks, Kelsey. That's absolutely fascinating. And you talked about a lot of things that I think are reflected in some of the questions that are coming through. So, and thank you to all of our panelists and speakers today. That was really great. And let's move on to some of the Q&As. And what I will try and do is I'll try and couple some of them together, because some of the questions are bringing in similar concepts in a slightly different way. And I see quite a lot of questions focusing around customers and value and different actors? Because I think ultimately what we're seeing and what's been shown in the report and Jeff and Maddie's work is that there's a lot of new actors in this space, and customers or end users, or whatever the right terminology is in this new territory, are really quite central here to the functioning of digital energy platforms. So how can we think more about value, right? So if it's not a regulated space, who determines what value is created, how it's created, and who benefits, and where, so do customers see that value? What about, is it at the ESO, is it DSO level? So how can we balance this in terms of value amongst these different customers in an unregulated space? Do any of the panelists have any thoughts on that? Jeff?
I can start, but I definitely like to hear Kelsey and maybe even Dinka's opinion on this as well. So I guess what we said in the presentation and what we say in the report is these platforms could unlock certainly perhaps a lot of unutilized assets in the system, or underutilized assets in the system, or currently not participating assets in the system. Future assets like electric vehicles, heating systems, batteries, all of that kind of thing. And they might be able to solve a whole range of current and future problems because they can connect these kind of communities, individuals, aggregated masses, whatever it might be. That is rather dependent on a couple of things. One is that value, broadly determined, is realized by those participating. People are participating, or assets are participating for reasons. It might be economic value, it might be to increase the reliability of your service, it might be for public good reasons, whatever it might be, that has to be realized. So you have to know what the outcome is that's been achieved, you have to know why you're participating, everything has to be clear, there has to be a lot of transparency that what you did actually made a difference, whatever it might be. I think that the thing that needs to happen if we're really going to see these platforms come to become a very important part of the system is you need to start to be able to tap into those multiple values that these underutilized or unutilized assets in the systems could offer. Now, if you look at just the broad numbers, because I think there was also a question on kind of like what value are we talking about? Bayes and Ofgem put a number on smart systems in their smart systems and flexibility plan of up to 40 billion by 2050. But in the most part, the analysis I've seen said it's worth about £3 billion a year as a market. So it's a reasonable size, potentially growing as you get more assets and more issues on a very decarbonized system in the future. But right now, as I talked about with let's say the action at the system operation level, national grid versus distribution level, we don't know who's going to be operating those markets. We don't know kind of where that value is going to lie. So we don't know exactly where those things, where those assets could play at the moment. And that's the sort of thing we need some certainty on going forwards. And we need a little bit of certainty that it's going to be all right if you have an asset to realize all of the value it offers to the system, not just siloed pockets of value with a lot of, say, admin and difficulty in accessing one compared to another one. So I think all of those things we need a little bit more resolution on, but the money and the value is definitely there.
Do any of the other panelists want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll chip in on that as well. We did a kind of high level paper that kind of matches those Bayes numbers, looking at around, I think we got to a value of about 2.7 billion could be realized per year. Just looking at peak growth in the network due to EVs and heat pumps and electrifying other parts of our life, and what flexibility could save us in that peak. So yeah, looking at around 2.7 billion, but I think the difficulty is right now there's these kind of headline figures that are out there, and it's still not really clear how that breaks down into, like you said, ESO services, DSO services, how do peer-to-peer markets fit into that, and we do at Picklow, as the kind of marketplace in the middle, get a lot of questions around when people are looking into these DSO flexibility services around pricing and how should we bid. And as the middleman, we don't control the pricing, unfortunately, so we can only give them answers based on information we have and that the DSOs can provide. So we do try and encourage the DSOs when they're advertising these flexibility competitions to put in budgets and price ranges for what they're looking for. We have had success doing that, and I think it has helped steer the market a little bit more. But I think in these early days, there's still a little bit of fear or hesitation from both sides of the market. No one wants to be the first one to set a price just in case it's too high or too low. So I think there is a lot of work to be done around this. It's an important part of Leo at looking at what the value of these markets are and how we can start to be able to stack services and understand these things better. So I wouldn't say I have a clear answer, but it's on the radar for Leo. For Base Flex Exchange, we're looking at different ways that those DSO and ESO services could be stacked and viewed in one single platform, and how we can best kind of optimize having all that information in one place. But for now, all we can really do is we've encouraged the DSOs to publish pricing guides when they post these competitions, and then we do release the kind of bid results at the end, so people have an idea of what's been accepted, what's been rejected, and we are trying to do and provide more analysis and insights into what type of assets are winning what type of contracts, and so we can understand that value piece in more in detail and looking at specific asset types, specific areas. Because I mean, a 2.7 billion annual value sounds great, but if by the time you get down to a home battery, you're getting a couple pounds, how much is that really benefiting you? So I think we'll continue to provide as much transparency and visibility around the kind of economics as we can, and push, I guess, both sides of the market to allow us to. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's going to be up to the market of how, I think right now, what they're willing to kind of release as public information.
Awesome, thanks, Kelsey. In the interest of time, I'm just going to jump onto probably what's going to end up being the last question, unless it's a super quick answer. But I really want to ask you guys a little bit about ethical governance, agile regulation, principle-based regulation, a number of questions coming in around that. Looking at things like the trade-offs that you might face between customer protection and regulation, how you can really work in that environment to build consumer trust, when the right point to step in is, and what we might be able to learn from other sectors or other countries. So any thoughts on that from our panel? Yeah, off you go, Jeff.
Okay, I'll try and do the quick, I think I'll just make 2 points. So I used to work at Ofgem, and obviously we were, as an organization, very interested in principles-based regulation. Now, there was a couple of things that were really important. So one is we did look across different sectors to see how it was being implemented. So there is a lot of learning that can be done. And it also tells you about the good and the bad side of principles-based regulation. And the good side is when it's working and everyone feels a bit nervous about whether they're meeting the principles, but are never being told, exactly whether they're meeting the principles. So they're always sort of competing to outmeet the principles. The bad side is if everyone asks for increasingly detailed guidance on how to meet the principle, then it ends up being incredibly prescriptive because nobody goes outside of what the guidance says what is good in a space. The second point is that if you're going to allow that space, say, to regulate just with principles in the most part or in an agile way, what you need to be as a regulator is also really good at data yourself, because you need to be able to follow kind of like what's happening in markets. And it might not be obvious trends like complaint numbers going up, but it might be following things like underlying principles like, the price of energy is changing, and some business models, because you know them, should be or could be doing something naughty. with their customers, like reducing something or increasing bills or something like that, that may be hidden because it's a different sort of proposition in the market. So you need to be, as a regulator, following trends, following data, understanding things a lot differently to what perhaps you're doing today. So I think that's the other point. So you need the data as well, and you need the skills within the regulator.
Thanks, Jeff. Maddie, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, you mentioned about kind of consumer trust and learning from other sectors. We have a case study in the report that touches on some of this, that looks at a ride-sharing platform and kind of the mistakes that they have made, and it's in things like making poor decisions on consumer protection and allowing, say, unauthorized users to access the platform and to provide services. And I guess you could see that translating to the energy sector. And on consumer trust, I think there's a real opportunity again here for platforms, because energy companies do not have a particularly good reputation, and that's when you compare it to other areas of the economy, but also sort of other utilities. And so we go into the report in this quite a bit on the reasons why that might be. But one of the unique selling points or the value propositions of digital platforms is that they can improve transparency between providers and users, and that's something that has really worked in other sectors. And so this should again be seen as a great opportunity as platforms innovate to figure out best practice on that. And as Dinka has said, sort of share that knowledge with the regulator so that they can kind of go on this journey together and understand how best to regulate and whether to regulate in the future.
Thanks, Maddie. I think in the interest of time, unless there's any burning points that either Kelsey or Dinka want to add, we may have to close there. So thank you everybody for staying on for the hour. A reminder again to download our full report, because you've got loads more information on that. And we will do our best after this event to try and answer any of those unanswered questions through a blog or some sort. So we'll make sure that's available alongside the webinar recording on our website. Also, we've got a few other reports that are coming out in the next few weeks from EnergyREV. And so if you're not already signed up, please do sign up to our newsletter. You can do that again by visiting our website, energyrev.org.uk, on our contacts page. And please do either do that or email info@energyrev.org.uk if you want to discuss this in any more detail, or if you've got any other things that you'd like to engage with us about. So I think I'll leave it there and just say thank you to our fabulous panel. Thank you to Maddie, Jeff, Kelsey and Dinka. And thank you to all of you for being such great active participants and for your questions. Thanks. Bye.